The heavy crystal goblet felt freezing cold against my palm. I stood perfectly still by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the Waldorf Astoria, watching the chaos unfold on the grand terrace below. Outside, under the brilliant, cloudless California sun, an army of florists was frantically assembling a massive wedding arch made entirely of rare, imported white orchids. Caterers were polishing silver forks that cost more than their weekly paychecks. Every single detail down there, every flower petal, every silk ribbon, every drop of vintage champagne was paid for by me. Exactly $120,000. That was the price tag I had happily paid to give my younger sister, Emily, the wedding of her absolute dreams. "Catherine, you are literally an angel." Emily's high-pitched, excited voice broke through my thoughts. I slowly turned around. Emily was standing in the center of the luxurious suite, twirling in her custom-made Vera Wang gown. She looked undeniably beautiful. At 24, she possessed that effortless, youthful glow that hadn't yet been hardened by the realities of the corporate world I lived in. I was 34, the CEO of my family's inherited investment firm, and I had spent my entire adult life protecting and providing for her after our parents passed away. "Do you love it?" I asked, my voice smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of the violent storm raging inside my chest. "I don't just love it, I'm obsessed with it." Emily rushed over, being careful not to step on her long lace train, and threw her arms around my neck. Her expensive perfume, the same perfume I had bought her for her birthday, filled my nose. "I owe you everything, Kath. You and Michael have been so incredibly generous. Jason and I could never have afforded a day like this. You are the best sister in the world. You and Michael." Hearing my husband's name fall from her lips felt like a jagged piece of glass sliding down my throat. I forced a warm, sisterly smile, gently patting her back before pulling away to take another sip of my champagne. "You deserve a perfect day, Emily," I whispered, looking directly into her wide, innocent blue eyes. "And I promise you, today is going to be a day that absolutely no one in this family will ever forget." She smiled brightly, completely missing the dark, lethal double meaning in my words. She turned back to the mirror, admiring her reflection, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her expensive satin shoes was about to completely collapse. As I watched her, my mind violently pulled me back to exactly 9 days ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was supposed to be in London for a week-long real estate acquisition conference, but the deal had closed 3 days early. I decided to fly home unannounced, hoping to surprise my husband, Michael. We had been married for 5 years. He was a handsome, charismatic architect who always complained that I worked too much. I thought coming home early would be the perfect romantic gesture. My private driver dropped me off at our secluded, gated estate in the Hollywood Hills at 2 p.m. The house was dead silent. I left my luggage in the marble foyer and quietly walked upstairs, a smile already forming on my face. But as I approached the master suite, I heard the sounds. It wasn't the television, it wasn't the housekeeping staff. It was the unmistakable, rhythmic, breathless sound of two people completely lost in passion. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to protect me. It tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe he was watching a movie. Maybe I was hearing things. But as I pushed the heavy oak door open just an inch, the brutal, unfiltered reality shattered my world into a million pieces. Michael was in our bed, the custom-made Italian linen bed I had personally chosen. His back was glistening with sweat as he moved aggressively. And beneath him, her hands tangled in his dark hair, her head thrown back against my expensive pillows in pure ecstasy, was my little sister, Emily. The physical reaction was instantaneous. All the blood drained from my face, my vision tunneled, and I felt a wave of nausea so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The two people I loved most in this world, The two people I had financed, supported, and protected were treating my sacred home like a cheap motel. A weaker woman would have kicked the door open. A more emotional woman would have started screaming, throwing lamps, and tearing the hair out of her sister's head. But I didn't build a multi-million-dollar empire by losing my temper. I built it by observing, gathering leverage, and destroying my enemies with absolute calculated precision. I didn't make a single sound. I slowly pulled the door shut, silently walked back down the grand staircase, grabbed my luggage, and walked right back out the front door. I checked into the Four Seasons Hotel downtown and sent Michael a text message. "London is exhausting. Flight got delayed. I'll be home on Friday. Miss you?" He replied exactly 2 minutes later. "Miss you too, my love. Can't wait to have you back. Working hard on a new design project at home today." I had stared at that text message for an hour, the heartbreak slowly evaporating, leaving behind a terrifying, ice-cold resolve. They wanted to play a dirty, deceptive game on my dime. They wanted to mock me in my own bed while spending my money to fund their perfect little lives. I took one last look at Emily as she giggled with the makeup artist in the hotel suite. Tonight, she was going to stand in front of 200 people and pledge her eternal loyalty to her fiancé, Jason. And tonight, I was going to give her a wedding gift that would burn her entire fake world to the ground. Treść wiadomości, Gemini, when I officially returned from London 3 days after discovering the affair, Michael was waiting for me in the grand foyer of our estate with a bouquet of my favorite white lilies. He wore that same charismatic, boyish smile that had convinced me to marry him 5 years ago. When he wrapped his arms around me and kissed my forehead, it took every ounce of my willpower, every shred of corporate discipline I had mastered over the years, not to physically recoil. His skin felt like poison. The faint scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne, the very cologne I bought for our anniversary, made my stomach violently turn. "I missed you so much," he whispered, pressing his face into my neck. "The house is completely empty without you, Kath." "I missed you too, darling," I replied smoothly, my voice remarkably steady. I smiled, looking past his shoulder at the sweeping staircase leading to the bedroom where, just 72 hours earlier, I had watched him defile my sanctuary with my own sister. Playing the role of the oblivious, loving wife was the most agonizing performance of my life, but I executed it flawlessly. I had to, because while Michael thought I was exhausted from overseas meetings, I had actually spent those 3 days in a private suite at the Four Seasons, executing a meticulous, ruthless plan of total annihilation. My first call had been to Marcus Vance, the most aggressive and terrifyingly efficient private investigator in Los Angeles. Marcus specialized in corporate espionage and high-net-worth divorces. Within 24 hours of my call, while Michael was out at a client lunch that I now knew was just a rendezvous at a boutique hotel with Emily, Marcus's team had quietly bypassed our estate's security system. They installed state-of-the-art, motion-activated 4K audio and video recording devices in the master bedroom, the guest house, the living room, and Michael's private home office. Miniature lenses the size of a pinhead were seamlessly integrated into the air vents and smoke detectors. By the time I came home with my luggage, my entire house was a digital fortress, streaming directly to a secure, encrypted server on my personal laptop. The things I saw and heard over the next few days would have broken a normal person. I watched them from my office while pretending to analyze quarterly financial reports. I watched Emily, my sweet, innocent little sister, walk through my front door the moment I left for the office. I listened to them laugh. I listened to Emily complain about her fiancé, Jason, calling him boring and too predictable, while Michael poured her a glass of my vintage wine. But the most unforgivable moment, the moment that truly solidified my decision to destroy them publicly, was captured on a Tuesday afternoon. I was watching the live feed from my laptop at work. They were lying in my bed. Emily was resting her head on Michael's bare chest, tracing circles on his skin. "Do you think Catherine suspects anything?" Emily had asked, her voice laced with a sickening mix of guilt and thrill. Michael had chuckled, a dark, arrogant sound that made my blood run cold. Kath? God, no. She's completely obsessed with her company. She lives in spreadsheets and board meetings. As long as her bank accounts are full and I smile for her high society dinners, she's completely blind. Besides, she loves you too much to ever see what's right in front of her. He thought my wealth made me blind. He thought my love for my sister made me weak. He had severely underestimated the woman he married. My second call had been to my lead financial attorney, Richard Sterling. Together, we initiated a brutal forensic audit of every single bank account, credit card, and trust fund associated with Michael. We had signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement before the wedding, a non-negotiable condition from my late father, but I needed to know exactly how deep Michael's deception went. What Richard found was staggering. Michael hadn't just been sleeping with Emily. He had been financing her entire lavish lifestyle using a secondary credit card tied to my primary business account. He had disguised the transactions as architectural consulting fees and material acquisitions. The diamond tennis bracelet Emily proudly wore to her bridal shower, bought by Michael. The down payment for her luxury SUV, paid for by Michael. He had stolen over $80,000 of my money in the last 12 months to spoil the sister I was already financially supporting. I didn't confront him. I didn't say a word. I just instructed Richard to quietly freeze the secondary accounts, setting a trigger that would lock Michael out of every financial asset the exact moment I gave the signal. The true test of my sanity came the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner. We were seated at a long, candlelit table at a prestigious French restaurant. I sat directly across from Jason, the groom. Jason was a genuinely good man, a high school math teacher with a kind heart who worshipped the ground Emily walked on. He looked at her with such pure, unadulterated adoration that it made me physically sick to my stomach. He had no idea he was about to marry a woman who had spent the last year in his future brother-in-law's bed. Halfway through the dinner, Emily stood up and tapped her champagne glass. The room fell silent. "I just want to make a quick toast," Emily said, her eyes shining with fake tears as she looked directly at me. "To my big sister, Catherine, and to Michael. You two have shown Jason and me what a perfect, loving marriage looks like. You are my absolute role models. If Jason and I can be even half as happy as you two are, we will be the luckiest people in the world." Michael reached under the table and squeezed my hand, smiling warmly at Emily. I squeezed his hand back, raising my glass to my cheating husband and my traitorous sister. I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. Let them have their toast. Let them enjoy their expensive French wine and their beautiful, fabricated reality. Because locked inside the sleek designer clutch sitting on my lap was a sleek silver USB drive. And contained on that drive was the highest definition, undeniable proof of their betrayal. They thought they were playing a game, but they didn't realize the board belonged to me, the pieces belonged to me, and the game was already over. The sun rose over Los Angeles, casting a pale, golden light through the sheer curtains of my hotel suite, but I felt absolutely no warmth. I hadn't slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the last 8 hours sitting in the velvet armchair by the window, turning the small, sleek silver USB drive over and over in my hand. It was no larger than my thumb, yet it possessed the atomic weight to obliterate 3 lives, burn down a marriage, and shatter a family permanently. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the bridal suite had devolved into a chaotic, suffocating tornado of hairspray, expensive cosmetics, and overflowing champagne flutes. 5 bridesmaids fluttered around like nervous birds, cooing over every trivial detail. I sat perfectly still in the corner makeup chair, my face an impenetrable mask of serene joy, as a celebrity makeup artist applied a flawless, waterproof foundation to my skin. I would not be crying today, but I appreciated the irony of the precaution. "Catherine, you look absolutely breathtaking," a deep, smooth voice murmured from the doorway. I opened my eyes and looked into the vanity mirror. Michael was standing behind me, dressed in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo that I had paid $10,000 for just 3 weeks ago. He looked like the picture-perfect, wealthy, devoted husband. He rested his hands on my bare shoulders, his thumbs gently stroking my collarbone. It took every ounce of psychological conditioning I possessed not to violently shove him away. "Thank you, darling," I replied smoothly, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "You don't look so bad yourself." Michael leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long velvet box. He popped it open, revealing a stunning teardrop diamond necklace resting on black silk. "I know today is about Emily," he whispered, his voice dripping with fabricated affection, "but I wanted to get you something to thank you for organizing all of this, for being such an incredible, generous wife. You hold this entire family together, Kath. Funds for this necklace." Michael had used funds for this necklace. Michael had used the secondary credit card tied to my corporate account to buy my thank you gift, attempting to cover his guilt with my own money. He fastened the cold platinum chain around my neck. It felt incredibly heavy, like a hangman's noose made of diamonds. "It's beautiful, Michael," I said softly, my voice devoid of any tremor. "I will wear it all day. I wouldn't take it off for the world." An hour later, Emily cleared the room of the bridesmaids. She needed help with the final, intricate silk buttons running down the back of her Vera Wang gown, and she insisted that only her big sister could do it. I stood behind her, my fingers deftly maneuvering the delicate fabric. "I'm so nervous, Kath," she breathed, looking at our reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. "Do you think I'm making the right choice? Jason is so good. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve him." "You don't," I thought, my hands remaining perfectly steady as I fastened the final button near the nape of her neck. "You are a parasitic, selfish child who spent the last year desecrating my home, and Jason is a lamb walking happily into a slaughterhouse." "It's normal to have cold feet, Emily," I said aloud, my tone reassuring and soft. I placed my hands on her waist, smiling at her through the mirror. "But after today, everything will change. I promise you that. Your old life is officially over." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said, tears welling in her innocent blue eyes. "I know exactly what you've been doing," I replied quietly. She blinked, a brief flash of confusion crossing her face, before I quickly added, "Planning a wedding is stressful. Now, dry your eyes. Your groom is waiting." Before the limousines arrived to take us to the cathedral, I slipped away from the bridal party under the guise of checking the floral arrangements in the grand ballroom. The massive reception hall was empty, save for the catering staff setting the tables. I bypassed them completely and walked straight toward the elevated, darkened audio-visual control booth at the back of the room. David, the lead technician I had hired for the evening, was adjusting the massive 4K projectors aimed at the 4 enormous screens suspended above the dance floor. "Mrs. Sterling," David said respectfully, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Everything is set for the cocktail hour and the dinner ambiance. Did you bring the file for the childhood slideshow?" "I did," I said, reaching into my designer clutch and pulling out 2 items. The silver USB drive, and a thick, unmarked white envelope containing $5,000 in untraceable cash. I placed both on the mixing console in front of him. David looked at the envelope, then back up at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "David, I am going to give you very specific, non-negotiable instructions," I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that I usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. "When the main course is cleared tonight, I will stand up and tap my glass. I will introduce a special video gift for the bride and groom. When I give you a direct nod, you will plug this drive in and hit play. It will broadcast to all 4 screens, and the audio will be routed through the primary concert speakers." David swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the thick envelope of cash. "Okay, just hit play." "No," I corrected him, leaning in slightly, my eyes locking onto his. You will hit play, and then you will physically lock the door to this control booth. You will not pause it. You will not lower the volume. I do not care if people start screaming. I do not care if my husband runs up here and threatens to kill you. I do not care if the bride faints. You will let the video play until the screen goes black. If you do exactly as I say, there is another envelope with $10,000 waiting for you in my car. Do we understand each other? The young technician looked terrified, but the promise of $15,000 for pushing a button was too much for him to refuse. He slowly nodded, slipping the envelope into his jacket and taking the silver drive. Understood, Mrs. Sterling. The door stays locked. With the execution mechanism fully primed, I walked out of the ballroom, my high heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. The wedding ceremony itself was an agonizing display of theatrical hypocrisy. The massive Gothic cathedral was packed with 200 of our closest friends, family, and high society business partners. I sat in the very front pew, directly next to Michael. When Emily walked down the aisle, looking like a vision of purity in white lace, Jason burst into genuine, profound tears. He wiped his face, staring at her with such pure devotion that my chest physically ached for him. But I wasn't looking at the groom. Out of the corner of my eye, I was watching Michael. My husband wasn't looking at Emily with the fond, protective gaze of a brother-in-law. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark and intensely focused on her figure beneath the silk. It was a look of possessive, burning lust. Right there, in the house of God, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, he was undressing the bride with his eyes. When the elderly priest began to speak, the words felt like physical blows. Do you, Emily, take Jason to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, be faithful to him as long as you both shall live? I do, Emily lied, her voice echoing sweetly through the cavernous church. And do you, Michael? My mind violently overlaid the priest's words with the sick reality of their betrayal. Do you, Michael, promise to keep sleeping with your wife's sister, spending her money, and treating her home like a brothel? I pronounce you husband and wife, the priest declared joyfully. You may kiss the bride. The cathedral erupted in thunderous applause. Beside me, Michael stood up, clapping loudly, a massive, genuine smile plastered across his handsome face. I stood up right next to him, clapping just as hard. I smiled until my face hurt. The trap had finally closed. The legal documents were signed. Jason was legally bound to her, which meant the public fallout was going to be absolutely catastrophic. As the bridal party began to march back down the aisle, heading toward the waiting limousines and the multi-million-dollar reception that awaited them, I reached up and gently touched the cold, heavy diamond necklace Michael had given me that morning. Enjoy the applause, Emily, I thought, my eyes tracking her as she walked past my pew, because in exactly 3 hours, I am going to end your entire life. The doors to the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel swung open precisely at 6 o'clock in the evening. As the 200 guests flooded inside, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. The space had been completely transformed into a breathtaking, ethereal winter garden. Thousands of imported white hydrangeas and cascading orchids hung from the crystal chandeliers. A 12-piece string quartet played elegant, classical renditions of modern pop songs in the corner. Waiters in impeccable white tuxedo jackets floated through the room, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, truffled lobster bisque, and glasses of vintage Dom Perignon. It was a masterpiece of extreme wealth, and it was the perfect glittering stage for a massacre. I took my seat at the long, elevated head table overlooking the dance floor. The seating arrangement was a cruel, poetic joke that I had personally designed. Emily and Jason sat in the center as the glowing newlyweds. I sat directly to Emily's right, playing the role of the devoted, supportive older sister. And to my right sat Michael, the loving, successful brother-in-law. From the outside, we looked like American royalty, the perfect, untouchable family. As the first course was served, the room filled with the warm, intoxicating hum of laughter and clinking crystal. I meticulously cut my Wagyu beef, eating small, deliberate bites. I couldn't actually taste anything. My entire body was vibrating with a cold, terrifying adrenaline, but my hands remained perfectly steady. "This is unbelievable, Kath." Michael leaned over, whispering into my ear. His breath was warm, smelling of expensive scotch and mint. He placed his hand on my bare thigh under the silk tablecloth, giving it a firm, possessive squeeze. "You really outdid yourself. Look at her. She's glowing." I slowly turned my head to look at him. His dark eyes were fixed on Emily, who was laughing at a joke Jason had just made. Michael wasn't looking at my sister with familial pride. He was looking at her with a ravenous, hidden hunger. His hand was on my leg, but his mind was in her bed. "She deserves everything she's getting tonight," I replied smoothly, taking a slow sip of my ice water. "Every single thing." "You're a good sister," Michael murmured, finally pulling his gaze away from the bride and smiling at me. The sheer psychopathic ease with which he lied to my face was almost impressive. For 5 years, I had shared my life, my fortune, and my body with a complete stranger. As the dinner progressed, the agonizing masquerade continued. Emily leaned over Jason to grab my hand tightly. "Catherine, I just can't stop thanking you." Emily beamed, her face flushed with champagne and the thrill of being the center of attention. "I was just telling Jason, none of this would be possible without your and Michael's success. You've given us a fairy tale." "Well," I said, offering her a pristine, chilling smile. "Every fairy tale needs a memorable ending, Emily. Just wait until the dessert." Jason, the innocent collateral damage in this horrific war, raised his glass toward me. "To Catherine and Michael, thank you for welcoming me into this family. I promise to spend the rest of my life taking care of Emily the way you two have taken care of each other." Those words struck me like a physical blow to the ribs. Jason was a good man. He was a high school math teacher who drove a 5-year-old Honda and spent his weekends volunteering. He had looked at Emily like she was the only woman on earth. It broke my heart to know that I was about to completely destroy his life, but keeping him in the dark would be a far greater cruelty. He deserved the truth, even if the truth was going to burn him alive. The plates from the main course were quietly cleared away by the waitstaff. The lighting in the ballroom subtly dimmed, shifting to a soft, romantic amber glow. It was time. The traditional speeches began. The best man gave a humorous, stumbling speech about Jason's college days. The maid of honor, one of Emily's vapid sorority sisters, cried through a 5-minute monologue about how Emily and Jason were soulmates. The crowd laughed, clapped, and wiped away sentimental tears. Throughout the speeches, I kept my eyes focused on the elevated control booth at the back of the room. I could see the faint blue glow of the monitors. I could see David, the technician, sitting tensely in his chair, his hand hovering near the main console. He was waiting for my signal. The room grew quiet as Jason's father, a sweet, elderly man with a trembling voice, finished the final scheduled toast. "To the bride and groom," he said, raising his glass high. "May you have a lifetime of honesty, loyalty, and unwavering love." "Cheers!" the room echoed in unison. 200 glasses chimed together. As the guests took their seats and the quiet murmur of conversation began to rise again, I placed my linen napkin on the table. I felt Michael look at me, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion as I pushed my chair back and stood up. I picked up my silver butter knife. I picked up my crystal champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, clear sound cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a gunshot. The music slowly faded out. 200 faces turned toward the head table. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Emily looked up at me, her smile wide and encouraging. Michael leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a look of relaxed pride, fully expecting me to deliver a tear-jerking, loving tribute to my little sister. I took a deep breath. The microphone on the table picked up the sound, amplifying it through the massive concert speakers. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked directly into the camera lens recording the event from the center aisle. Then I looked down at Emily. Finally, I locked eyes with my husband. "Good evening, everyone." My voice rang out, cold, clear, and perfectly steady. I know I wasn't on the official schedule for a speech tonight, but as the person who financed this beautiful celebration, I felt it was only right that I give the bride and groom their final and most important wedding gift. I paused, letting the suspense hang in the heavy, perfumed air. Up in the control booth, I saw David sit up straight. I gave him one slow, deliberate nod. I wanted to show Jason and all of you the true foundation that this marriage is being built upon. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Please, direct your attention to the screens. The crystal chandeliers hanging above the dance floor instantly went dark. For 2 agonizing seconds, the ballroom was plunged into pitch blackness. A confused, collective murmur rippled through the 200 guests. Then, with a sharp electronic click that echoed through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, all 4 massive 4K projector screens suspended above the room flared to life simultaneously. The image wasn't grainy. It wasn't a blurry, shaky cell phone video. It was crystal clear, high-definition, cinematic quality. It was my master bedroom, the custom Italian linens, the heavy oak headboard, and rolling across the center of the frame, entirely naked and completely entangled in each other, were my husband and my sister. The audio kicked in a second later. It wasn't muffled. It was broadcast through the towering concert speakers designed for a live band. The heavy, rhythmic breathing, the breathless moans, the sickening slap of skin against skin, it all blasted through the elegant, floral-scented air of the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom like a detonating bomb. The physical reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and apocalyptic. To my left, Jason's elderly mother let out a sharp, terrified shriek, clapping both hands over her mouth. The best man dropped his wine glass. It shattered against the marble floor, but the sound was completely drowned out by the grotesque audio echoing from the screens. Gasps of pure, unadulterated horror erupted from every table. High society matriarchs covered their eyes. My corporate board members stared in open-mouthed, paralyzed shock. I didn't look at the screens. I had already memorized every disgusting frame. Instead, I slowly turned my head to look at Emily. Her face was a mask of absolute, paralyzing terror. All the blood had violently drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax corpse in a $100,000 wedding gown. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her eyes wide and bulging as she stared up at her own 20-foot face on the screen, screaming in ecstasy beneath her brother-in-law. "Turn it off!" Emily finally found her voice, letting out a primal, guttural scream that tore through her vocal cords. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. "Make it stop! Jason, please, it's a fake! Turn it off!" But the video didn't stop. David, locked safely inside the reinforced AV booth, was earning his $15,000. On the screen, the physical act finished, and the scene transitioned to the conversation I had recorded days later. The audio of Michael's arrogant voice boomed over the weeping crowd. "Do you think Catherine suspects anything?" Emily's voice echoed. "Kath? God, no!" Michael's voice sneered from the speakers, his massive face filling the screens. "She's completely obsessed with her company. As long as her bank accounts are full and I smile for her high society dinners, she's completely blind. Besides, she loves you too much to ever see what's right in front of her." To my right, Michael had leaped out of his chair with such violent force that it tipped backward and crashed to the floor. His handsome face was contorted into an ugly, desperate snarl of rage and panic. The charming architect was gone. In his place was a trapped, cornered rat. "Shut it down!" Michael roared, his voice cracking. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He scrambled away from the head table and sprinted across the dance floor toward the back of the room. "I'll kill you! Open this door! Turn the damn screens off!" I watched him reach the control booth, violently twisting the doorknob and slamming his shoulder against the heavy wood. But the door didn't budge. The video continued to play, mercilessly exposing every lie, every stolen dollar, and every broken vow. I slowly turned my attention to Jason. The young math teacher hadn't moved. He was standing perfectly still, his hands resting flat on the white tablecloth. He was staring directly at Emily. The pure, devoted love that had illuminated his eyes just an hour ago in the cathedral had been completely extinguished. His face was hollow. He looked like a man who had just been told he had 5 minutes to live. "Jason," Emily sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. Her Vera Wang veil was slipping off her hair, dragging through a plate of lobster bisque. "Jason, please." "I can explain. It was a mistake. I love you." Jason looked down at her hand, then slowly looked up at my face. He didn't yell. He didn't throw a punch. He simply reached up, unclipped the silk boutonniere from his lapel, and dropped it onto the table. "You make me sick," Jason whispered. His voice was incredibly quiet, but in the chaotic, weeping room, Emily heard it perfectly. She collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands, wailing hysterically. Jason turned his back on his bride, walked off the elevated platform, and headed straight for the grand exit doors. His parents quickly followed him, shooting Emily looks of pure, venomous disgust. Up in the booth, the video finally cut to black. The ballroom lights violently snapped back onto full brightness, illuminating the absolute devastation I had caused. 200 people were staring at the head table. No one was eating. No one was drinking. The silence was heavier than a concrete vault. Michael had stopped pounding on the booth door. He slowly turned around, standing alone in the middle of the empty dance floor, his chest heaving. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from Emily's sobbing form to him. He was a pariah, a social and professional leper. My corporate partners, the men who funded his architectural firm, were looking at him like he was a piece of trash stuck to their shoes. I calmly picked up my crystal champagne flute. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cool, expensive liquid soothe my dry throat. Then, I leaned forward toward the microphone that was still resting on the table. "I told you," I said, my voice echoing through the deafening silence of the ruined ballroom, "that I was giving you a wedding gift you would never forget." I stood up, my posture perfectly straight, my black designer dress contrasting sharply against the sea of white floral arrangements. I looked down at Emily, who was shivering uncontrollably, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "You wanted to play house in my bed, Emily?" I asked coldly. "Congratulations, you can keep him. Because as of this exact moment, neither of you has a single dime of my money left." I let the microphone amplify the cold, hard silence that followed my declaration. 200 elite guests, CEOs, socialites, and politicians were holding their collective breath, watching the execution of a marriage and a career in real time. Emily was still crumpled in her seat, her tear-streaked face buried in her trembling hands. The Vera Wang gown now looked like a tragic, discarded costume. Down on the dance floor, Michael was completely frozen. His chest was heaving, his fists clenched at his sides, as the absolute reality of his situation began to violently crush him. "You think this is just a family dispute?" I asked, my voice echoing through the towering floral centerpieces. "You think I'm just a heartbroken wife throwing a temper tantrum? Let me educate both of you on the cost of your betrayal." I gestured gracefully with my champagne flute toward a table near the front. "My lead financial attorney, Richard Sterling, is sitting at table number 4. Please, Richard, give them a wave." Richard, a silver-haired shark in a charcoal suit, didn't smile, but he politely raised his water glass. Michael's eyes darted to the lawyer, a fresh wave of panic washing over his handsome, arrogant features. He knew exactly what Richard was capable of. While you two were busy testing the durability of my imported mattress, I continued smoothly, Richard and I were conducting a forensic audit of every single account tied to my name. Michael, you thought you were incredibly clever, funneling $80,000 through my secondary corporate cards to buy Emily diamond bracelets and a luxury SUV. A sharp gasp rippled through the audience. A few of Michael's business partners sitting at table 7 exchanged disgusted, furious looks. Stealing from a spouse was ugly, but stealing corporate funds? That was professional suicide. As of 6 o'clock this evening, I announced, checking my diamond Rolex, the exact moment the priest pronounced you husband and wife, a coordinated legal strike was executed. Michael, your access to our shared accounts, your corporate credit cards, and your private investment portfolios have been permanently frozen. Your thumbprint has been wiped from the biometric safe in my study. The locks on the Bel Air estate were changed an hour ago. Your clothes and personal belongings have been packed into cheap cardboard boxes and left on the sidewalk outside the front gates. Catherine, stop! Michael finally yelled, his voice cracking. He took a step toward the head table, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. Please, we can fix this. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't do this in front of everyone. Don't destroy my firm. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a terrifying, hollow sound. Your firm? I repeated, looking down at him as if he were a pathetic insect. Michael, you don't have a firm. My holding company owns 51% of your architectural practice. I provided the seed capital, and as the majority shareholder, I held an emergency board meeting yesterday. You have been officially terminated as a managing partner due to gross financial misconduct. You are unemployed, Michael. You are homeless, and you are completely, utterly broke. Michael stumbled backward, his legs literally giving out for a second before he caught himself on the edge of a guest table. The men at that table, his former colleagues, instinctively leaned away from him, pulling their wives closer, treating him like he was highly contagious. I turned my head back to my sobbing sister. And as for you, Emily, I said softly. The microphone caught the terrifying calm in my voice. The trust fund our parents left behind, the one I managed and graciously allowed you to live off of for the last 6 years, I liquidated it on Wednesday. I donated every single penny to a charity for battered women in Los Angeles. You don't have a cent to your name. Emily let out a sharp, breathless wail, clutching the bodice of her $100,000 dress. Which brings me to my final point, I said, setting my champagne glass down on the table. I picked up my designer clutch and unclasped it. This breathtaking winter garden, the rare orchids, the beluga caviar, the vintage Dom Perignon. It truly is a spectacular wedding. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, offering them a polite corporate smile. I paid the initial deposit to secure the venue, I explained clearly. However, the final invoice for the catering, the floral arrangements, and the open bar, totaling roughly $85,000, was scheduled to be charged to my platinum card at the end of the night. I pulled my heavy metal platinum card from my clutch. With 2 fingers, I held it up for the entire room to see. Then, I pulled a small pair of silver cuticle scissors from my bag. Snip. The heavy metal card cracked in half. I dropped the 2 pieces onto the white tablecloth directly in front of Emily's plate. The card is canceled, I announced. I looked down at Emily, my eyes as cold and unforgiving as the Arctic Ocean. The final bill is due at midnight. I suggest you and your new brother-in-law start figuring out how to wash a lot of dishes in a very expensive dress. I picked up my clutch and stepped away from the microphone. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. I walked down the steps of the elevated platform and began my exit down the center aisle of the ballroom. As I walked, the sea of 200 guests silently parted for me. No one spoke. No one tried to stop me. I walked past the shattered remnants of my marriage and the smoking ruins of my sister's future. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom were opened for me by a terrified waiter. I stepped out into the cool, quiet Los Angeles night, the valet already bringing my sleek black town car around the driveway. I slid into the leather back seat, took a deep breath of the fresh air, and felt a single perfect tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was the ultimate intoxicating relief of absolute victory. 8 months have passed since the night I turned the Beverly Hills Hotel into a digital slaughterhouse. I am currently sitting on the expansive teak deck of a private yacht anchored just off the Amalfi Coast, sipping a glass of chilled Vermentino. The Mediterranean sun is warming my skin, and the gentle rock of the ocean feels like absolute peace. My company's stock has surged by 22% this quarter, and I have never felt more powerful, more independent, or more alive. The immediate aftermath of the wedding reception was, according to my lawyer Richard, a scene of unprecedented, chaotic desperation. When I drove away in my town car, the hotel management locked down the ballroom. They do not take kindly to an unpaid $85,000 invoice. With my credit card destroyed and my accounts completely disconnected, the general manager demanded immediate alternative payment. Michael, whose accounts were already frozen, tried to write a personal check, which bounced violently the very next morning. Emily, sobbing and humiliated, tried to beg Jason's family for a loan. Jason's father looked at her with pure disgust, gathered his family, and walked out without saying a single word. The hotel sued them both. The legal battles that followed over the next few months were short, brutal, and incredibly satisfying. The prenuptial agreement I had forced Michael to sign years ago held up like an impenetrable fortress of titanium. He tried to hire a sleazy, aggressive divorce attorney on contingency, but the moment Richard presented the 4K video evidence of infidelity, along with the meticulously documented proof of his corporate embezzlement, his lawyer dropped him immediately. I didn't just divorce Michael, I utterly dismantled him. Because he had funneled $80,000 of my corporate funds to buy Emily's jewelry and car, I filed a formal report for corporate fraud. To avoid spending 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary, Michael was forced to accept a devastating plea deal. He had to surrender every single asset he had to his name for restitution. His luxury car, his expensive watches, even his custom golf clubs, all liquidated to pay back my company. Worse yet, the scandal was highly publicized in the architectural community. The ethics board permanently revoked his professional license. The handsome, arrogant architect who used to design multi-million-dollar mansions is now working the graveyard shift as a forklift operator at a wholesale lumber yard on the outskirts of the city. He lives in a damp, one-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat. His charming smile didn't survive the reality of minimum wage. And as for Emily, her fairy tale shattered completely. Jason filed for a legal annulment the morning after the wedding. Because the marriage was never consummated and the fraud was so publicly blatant, a judge granted it almost immediately. Jason has since moved on. I heard through a mutual friend that he is happily dating a lovely kindergarten teacher who treats him with the respect he actually deserves. Emily, on the other hand, was entirely excommunicated from high society. All of her wealthy sorority sisters and designer friends dropped her the second her trust fund was liquidated. Without my money to finance her life, she had to face the brutal reality of the real world for the first time. She and Michael tried to stay together, of course. They rented a cheap studio apartment together, claiming their love would get them through it. But as it turns out, sneaking around in a billionaire's mansion is a lot more romantic than fighting over who is going to pay the electric bill. They broke up in a screaming match less than 3 months later. Yesterday, my private investigator sent me a final complimentary update photograph. Emily is now working at a discount shoe store in a dying suburban mall. The photo showed her wearing a cheap polyester uniform, kneeling on the floor, sliding a pair of clearance sneakers onto the foot of a complaining customer. She looked exhausted. She looked 10 years older. I take another sip of my wine, looking out at the endless blue horizon of the Mediterranean Sea. People often think that revenge is a toxic emotion that poisons the person who holds it, but they are entirely wrong. When executed correctly, with patience, logic, and absolute ruthlessness, revenge is the ultimate cleanser. It burns away the parasites. It clears the rot. Michael and Emily thought they were the smartest people in the room. They thought they could use my wealth as a shield while they stabbed me in the back. But they forgot the golden rule of the empire they were so happily living in. Never try to play a game of deception with the woman who owns the casino.